What's up, guys? Welcome to the Dragon's Den. My name is Dusty, and today I'm gonna tell you what my top five favorite commanders are that I've ever actually had built. At number five, we're starting with Karametra, God of Harvest. This is a 5-drop green and white creature for 1 white, 1 green, 3 generic. It is a legendary enchantment creature, and its creature type is God. It is a 6/7, and it has indestructible. As long as your devotion to green and white is less than 7, Karametra isn't a creature. Whenever you cast a creature spell, you may search your library for a forest or a plains card, put it onto the battlefield tapped, then shuffle your library. This is a very, very solid card, as are most of the gods from Theros. Having it be an enchantment most of the time and have indestructible on top of that makes it very, very hard to remove, and that is just very, very good in Commander, as removal, board wipes, things like that are very common. So it having that indestructibility and not dying to creature removal, especially in the early game, is a very strong effect. So popular ways to build this commander would just be you can go green white stompy and just use the effect to ramp and get into your bigger spells even quicker. Landfall is another popular way to build this deck. However, how I had it built was Enchantress. This is a very it's become a more common deck type. I had this deck built around 2017, and I had it built as Enchantress. And basically, that means it plays certain spells that are called Enchantresses, which are creatures that allow you to draw cards when you cast enchantments or when enchantments enter the battlefield. So, it may not seem like Karametra has a whole lot of effect on that type of game, and to some extent, you would be correct. And there are definitely much better Enchantress commanders out there, especially in the modern day, but this is what I was playing at the time. So, what you would do is you would get your engine going by getting out some of those Enchantress cards that would allow you to draw a card basically every time you played a card, and the entire deck was basically enchantment cards. So, my ramp was things like Wild Growth, which for 1 green allows you to enchant a forest, and the forest taps for an additional green. Utopia Sprawl, which does something very similar. Or Exploration, which is a singular green and allows you to play an extra land on each of your turns. Or Burgeoning, which is a singular green for an enchantment that allows you to play a land every time an opponent plays a land. Those were very, very strong in a deck like this, because not only is just ramp is something you want to do in every single deck, but they were also enchantment cards. So if I had my enchantresses out, I was able to draw cards off of those ramp spells as well, and would allow me to use them even more, which is why Exploration is actually probably one of the stronger cards in this deck. Now, Karametra, I think, works very good as a commander for this type of deck, because, say, for some reason, you just don't have an enchantment in hand. Karametra herself is an enchantment, so when you cast her, you get the benefits off of your enchantresses. Also, if you play Karametra and you don't have any enchantresses on board, or maybe you want to put more on board, when you cast Karametra, or whenever you cast those enchantments, Karametra is going to trigger and it's going to ramp you. So, while it's not as good as something as, like, maybe Sithis is now, for the time, and even now, it is a very, very strong commander for Enchantress play. But now we're going to go on to my number 4 favorite deck, which is Yarok the Desecrated. It is a 5-drop commander in Sultai. It is a blue, a green, and a black, and 2 generic to cast for a 3/5 elemental horror. It has Death Touch and Lifelink, and if a permanent entering the battlefield causes a triggered ability of a permanent you control to trigger, that ability triggers an additional time. So it doubles up your enter the battlefield effects. This is one of my all-time favorite commanders. I had so much fun playing this deck. The only reason it's probably not higher on the list is the fact that the deck is so strong that every time I played it, my pod basically just turned against me because they hated playing against this deck because it is so consistent. Because playing Enter the Battlefield effects in general is just good, but now having them doubled is even better. And the way I built mine was just a Enter the Battlefield value deck that would combo off to win. So I ran cards like Panharmonicon to allow me to do it even with Yarick out. You would triple your Enter the Battlefield effect, or if Yarick just couldn't stick or if he kept getting removed, Panharmonicon was a way to continue that value engine rolling even if Yarick wasn't out. But see, Yarick works with a lot of different things. He doesn't just work with creatures entering the battlefield, he also works with lands. So running things like Rampaging Baloths or Tatyova would allow you to play lands and double up on those triggers as well. So I would have Tatyova out, play a land, gain 2 life, draw 2 cards. It was extremely well. And then it was super easy to ramp with things like Wood Elves, Elvish Rejuvenator, Farhaven Elf, all these things that would ramp you when they entered the battlefield now ramp you twice. There were lots of cards that would draw you cards when they entered the battlefield, like Elvish Mystic, Muldrifter. They would draw you cards when they entered the battlefield. They are now drawing you double the cards. And this deck ramped extremely well because you would run things like Conjurer's Closet or Thassa Deep Dwelling that would allow you to bounce your creatures at the end of each of your turns and get those effects more than just when they initially entered the battlefield. And then you could run things like Runescarred Demon that would allow you to tutor, and then on top of this being in black, to where you can just run things like Demonic Tutor, or green, where you can run things like Worldly Tutor to help you find your combo pieces. It just worked extremely well, and it was extremely consistent because you could have creature-based removal, such as Ravenous Chupacabra or Noxious Gearhulk, which were 2 of my favorites. And this deck was just extremely consistent, and that's why it got hated off the table so much, because no matter what I did, I'm sitting here playing creatures, getting value, and then it was easy to block with creatures because then you could play things like Eternal Witness, Timeless Witness, things like that, that when they entered the battlefield, got you those cards back into your hand so you could replay them again. So just every card you played was either drawing you cards or ramping you, getting or tutoring for your combo pieces until you would eventually combo out with, my favorites were either Deadeye Navigator and Peregrine Drake, or Ghostly Flicker with either Archaeomancer, Eternal Witness, something along those lines. And also like Peregrine Drake and Cloud of Fairies, making you infinite mana, allowing you to bounce one of your creatures infinite number of times, using something like Grey Merchant of Asphodel to drain your opponents, or Altar of the Brood to mill all your opponents out. Very strong, very consistent, very, very fun to play. My number 3 favorite deck of all time, the Ur Dragon. The Ur Dragon is a 9-cost commander. WUBRG +4, 10/10 with flying. And it also has Eminence. It says, as long as the Ur Dragon is in the command zone or on the battlefield, other dragon spells you cast cost 1 less to cast. And whenever one or more dragons you control attack, draw that many cards, then you may put a permanent card from your hand onto the battlefield. I don't think I need to tell you why this is the premier dragon commander and why it is so powerful. Yes, it has a 9 mana cost, but mana ramp, especially now, is easier than it has ever been before, with more ways to color fix than there's ever been in the past. So, while I do think that certain things like Shocklands and Fetch Lands are necessary to build this deck and it be extremely consistent, even when I had it built and I didn't have the money for those types of lands, this was an extremely good commander once you got it out. A lot of times it'll get hated off the table now, and you won't get to use it very much, but you get value the turn you play it, and you get value with it just sitting in the command zone. Eminence is one of the strongest abilities that has ever existed, allowing your commander to give you value even when it's just sitting in the command zone. So, up until you play it, and even if it gets hated off the table, you are getting value from this commander. And it's making all your dragons cost one less to cast. So, it is netting you one mana every single time you cast a dragon. It is free mana ramp just for existing. And that's crazy. Then once you get it onto the battlefield, as long as you can play it during your first main phase, you don't have to untap with this dragon to get great value out of it. So it says whenever one or more dragons you control attack, not whenever the Dragon attacks. So if you already have some dragons out, which presumably you will because this guy costs 9 mana, every single you swing, now you're drawing a bunch of cards. He is a draw engine, and then he allows you to play dragons or any permanent from your hand for free. That is extremely powerful. So you're drawing cards and getting free spells. Insanely good. So some of the better cards I'd say to play in this deck are going to be things that help you color fix. So Chromatic Lantern, Dryad of the Elysian Grove, Leyline of the Guild Pact, things of that nature that allow all of your lands to tap for any color of mana, I think are extremely vital in this deck, especially if you don't have the funds to be able to get things like fetches and shocks and things of that nature. So that definitely extremely helps. And then things like cost reducers. So think Urza's Incubator, Dragon Speaker Shaman, or Dragon Lord Servant, things like that that will allow your dragon spells to be cheaper. Or Fist of Suns, which is particularly good in the Dragon because it alone reduces the Dragon's cost by 4. And then things that maybe even double up your mana, or things so like Mirari's Wake would be extremely good in this deck because it will pump all your creatures and double your mana. Or things like Nyxbloom Ancient and Zendikara's Resurgent, which would again double up your mana, allowing you to cast more dragons. Then obviously you want to have a good dragon package in this deck. So think Goldspan Dragon, Scion of the Dragon, Utvara Hellkite, Steel Hellkite, things of that nature. Just good, big value dragons. And it's really just straightforward. Big dragon, you play big dragons. Getting on to my number 2 favorite commander of all time, Atraxa, Praetor's Voice. I have a long history with Atraxa. Atraxa was the first commander precon that I ever bought right after I started playing Magic in 2016. And I've had very many different versions of Atraxa, and I think that's why I like her so much. So obviously, I've built the 1/1 counter deck. I've had the 1/1 counter deck. That's how the precon comes built, is it's 1/1 counters and 1/1 counter synergy. So things like Master Biomancer that want to put counters on all your creatures are obviously very good. And I just got so excited about talking about her, I just realized that I got a little ahead of myself. Atraxa, Praetor's Voice is a 4-drop Angel Horror, and it's everything but red, one of each color but red. It's a 4/4 with Flying, Vigilance, Death Touch, Lifelink, and at the beginning of your end step, Proliferate. So they basically just stapled a bunch of keywords onto something and then let it do something at the end step, which is insanely good. So, yes, 1/1 counter. You get 1/1 counters on all your creatures. At the beginning of your end step, all your creatures get bigger. That alone is very good. There's 2 other ways that are popular to build this deck. I'd say probably the least popular way to build this deck is going to be Infect, which I've also had built. And you just put a bunch of different Infect creatures in the deck. You try to get a poison counter on each of your opponents, and then at the beginning of your end step, you proliferate those counters. It's super simple, but the most popular way I would say that Atraxa is built is Planeswalkers. Planeswalkers are one of the most popular creature types, or not creature types, excuse me, one of the most popular card types in the entire game. And Atraxa is extremely good with Planeswalkers, as she gives each Planeswalker an additional loyalty counter per turn, basically, because you're proliferating at the beginning of each of your end steps. And that was the way I had Atraxa built the longest, was Planeswalkers. So this is good because there are ways, like certain Planeswalkers, if you ult, you just win the game, basically. Like, there's a couple of different Teferis that are extremely good when you ult them, or think something along the lines of some of the Liliana cards and things like that, or Ugin, which is extremely good when you ult, just allowing you to draw a bunch of cards and put a bunch of things into play. And Atraxa helps them get to their ults faster. And there's even ways to get infinite Planeswalker abilities using the Chain Veil, which on its own says you get to activate your Planeswalker abilities more times each turn, or something like Oath of Teferi, which also allows you to activate your Planeswalker abilities more times per turn. And then you have things like the new Vorinclex, I think it's Vorinclex Monstrous Raider, and Doubling Season, which just have your Planeswalkers outright enter with double their normal counters on them. Crazy good. A lot of times this will allow you to instant ult and be good. So she's in green, so she's able to run those. White makes it extremely good removal, things like Path to Exile, Swords to Plowshares. Blue for counter spells and card draw, and black for tutors and whatnot. Just having everything but red makes this thing extremely consistent, and just all the keywords on it alone makes it a very, very strong commander. It's super simple, straightforward what it does, but I love it nonetheless. Then, my number one favorite commander of all time, Omnath, Locus of Creation. It is a 4-color deck, 4 mana cost, everything but black. It is a 4/4. When Omnath, Locus of Creation enters the battlefield, draw a card. With everything else this thing does, it really didn't need that, but it has it anyway. And so it has landfall. Whenever a land enters the battlefield under your control, you gain 4 life, if this is the first time this ability is resolved this turn. If it's the second time, add 1 red, 1 green, 1 white, 1 blue. If it's the third time, Omnath deals 4 damage to each opponent and each Planeswalker you don't control. So this thing just does an insane amount. So, obviously, it's going to be built as a landfall deck. That's pretty much how every Omnath deck is built, but landfall, and it's 4 colors. So, I had a lot of landfall cards that whenever lands entered the battlefield, it made tokens. So I'm thinking Nesting Dragon, Scoot Swarm, Zendikar's Royal, Felidar Retreat, things along that line. So every time I played a land, I was going wide. Then you want to be able to double up on your landfall triggers. So things that allow you to play multiple lands for turns. So Azusa Lost but Seeking, Oracle of Moldiah, Dryad of the Elysian Grove. Things like that. Things that allow you to play multiple lands. Then, you also want to be able to have clone effects in this deck. So, cloning Omnath is extremely powerful. So think Spark Double, Helm of the Host, things that allow you to make non-legendary clones of your commander. Because now, if you do that, you're playing 1 fetch, and you're gaining, let's say you've only cloned it once, you're gaining 8 life, sack the fetch, go get another land card, and now you get 8 free extra mana on your turn. And then if you have one of your additional land drop things out or something, you play an additional land, and now you're dealing 8 damage to each opponent and each creature, each planeswalker they control. That is extremely powerful. And then you have things like Lotus Cobra, which are also going to give you additional mana. And there's just landfall, I think, is such a strong mechanic that I don't have to sit here and explain to you how strong landfall is. This deck was a ton of fun to play, and most of the time, honestly, I built this deck right after 4-Color Omnath came out. And most of the time, people left me alone because the thing with these landfall decks is it doesn't look like you're doing much. You're just sitting there ramping. Who's scared of mana ramp? You're not doing much. You're just hanging out, getting a bunch of lands into play, and then all of a sudden, you throw out a few key pieces, you play a few lands, and you absolutely wipe your opponents out. You go big, you go wide, and it's just a ton of fun. So, I hope you guys enjoyed this and enjoyed listening to me talk about my 5 favorite commander cards my 5 favorite commanders that I've ever actually had built. I'm a huge commander player, and it's been basically the only format that I've played since I've started playing. So, with that being said, I hope you enjoyed, and please, down below, tell me, what is your favorite commander that you have ever had built? Or even just tell me the commander you want to build the most that you haven't built quite yet. That being said, I hope all of you have a great time. I'll catch you later.